Welcome to the Branding Room Only podcast, where we share career stories, strategies, and lessons learned on how industry leaders and influencers have built their personal brands. Now, let's get started with the show. Hi, everybody. It's Paula Egger, your host of Branding Room Only. Excited to be here with my friend, Morenike Williams. Let me tell you about her. Morenike Williams is the CEO of Vision Coaching, as well as a seasoned legal executive who leverages her leadership and executive experience, legal industry expertise, empathy, wit, and relatability to help legal professionals not only reach the top, but also thrive once they get there. She has helped partners, senior attorneys, GCs, and other senior in-house counsel define and achieve what success looks like for them. Vision Coaching's clients hail from various industries and sectors and practice in law firms, public and private companies, and nonprofit organizations. And most of all, she is my friend. Morenike, welcome to the Branding Room.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I've been waiting for my chance to get up here. So thanks for having me.
Of course. So as you know, because you are one of my little listeners, I'm going to start with my question, which is, what does personal brand mean to you? How would you define it?
So I think for me, as it relates to personal brand, it's a bit of my calling card. It's my reputation. I think that really is what it is. When I'm talking with clients and we're differentiating, is identity is how you describe yourself. Brand is how other people describe you. Mm-hmm. And so I think of my personal brand is if you ask someone, what do they think about Morenike? It's kind of what they would reflect back to you. And then scaling that and aggregating that across a number of people. Hopefully there's some consistency and continuity, but it really is just people reflecting back how they experience their interactions with me, my business, and things like that.
Love it. Love that. Speaking of interactions with you, how would you describe yourself in 3 words or short phrases?
I would say that I'm wise, I am transparent, and I'm spiritual. So those would be the 3 words I would use to describe myself.
I would also use spreadsheet savant. For those of you who know Morenike, you will laugh because she loves her spreadsheet. Let me tell you something. I feel so organized just talking to her. Anyway, so
listen, I love me a spreadsheet.
Listen, I've never seen anybody use a spreadsheet as adept as you do. So praises to all of the skill sets that we have. That is definitely one of yours. Tell me about this. Do you have a favorite quote or mantra that you use?
So I do, and it's actually on my website. It's Find Out Who You Are and Do It on Purpose by Dolly Parton. Ooh. So I love Dolly Parton. I've always loved her since I was a kid. I think Coat of Many Colors and Jolene were my 2 favorite songs. But that quote in particular for me, just finding out who you are and doing it on purpose, I think especially as I've matured over the years, it just speaks to the fact that we are inundated with so many messages about who we're supposed to be, who our parents want us to be, who society wants us to be. And I don't think a lot of us spend the time to intentionally figure out who am I for myself without someone else telling me who they think I should be. And when we don't do that work, we end up, or we can end up at times just following this other path, never really figuring out what makes me happy? How do I experience joy? What's fulfilling? And so I think it's a reminder for me, especially as I've sought to be and show up more authentically, to figure out who I am and be intentional about it. Not haphazard. You don't figure out, I don't think who you are haphazardly. It's I need to dig in, what's my mess? What's the great stuff? What do I need to work on? And it's just a daily reminder for me to do that work and to continue to do that work because I'm evolving, we always evolve. And so it's not a thing that you should do one time. You need to do it at different stages in your life as well.
I love that because I always say that the personal brand is intentionality and strategy. A good one, right, is you can have a good one without that, but I think it's much more fulfilling when you have the intention, the authenticity, and the consistency, which is all I mean. So I've never heard that quote, but I will be using it going forward. Love that. Love that. All right. What about this? What's your hype song?
So I'm gonna go with Montel Jordan. This is how we do it, and I mean, because it just never gets old. The why I chuckles, my other hype song, I feel like is Nuck If You Buck, but I feel like that brings up maybe a little bit more crunk energy, and you're like, I wish somebody would energy. And so I think that's if I feel like I'm going in more battle mode, I might put that on. So I'm a little bit ready for my spiciness. I got my armor up, but I think just generally, This Is How We Do It by Montel Jordan is always my go-to.
So I didn't know you were going to choose that. I actually thought you were going to choose a more Southern-based song. So Nuck If You Buck was in there with it for me. But Montel Jordan, I met him in an elevator in Las Vegas.
That's so random.
It was so random. He got into the elevator and I was like, oh my God, you're Montel Jordan. And I am 5'2", and I've been 5'2" since I was in 5th grade. And he is like 6'7".
Yes.
And he was like, I am? Anywho, shout out to Montel. I hope you hear this.
Right? It's like, hey, Montel.
Right. That part. He knows who he is and he does it on purpose. Okay. So we started talking a little bit about the South. Tell me, where did you grow up? How did you grow up and how did that shape you?
So I grew up in Tampa, Florida, born and raised 813. I am from Tampa. Let me just get off my soapbox real quick, but also Tampa proper is 813. Tampa Bay includes Clearwater, St. Pete, and all the surrounding areas. So I'm from Tampa proper. Okay. And I grew up there my entire life. My mom raised me by herself. My parents got divorced when I was probably about 3, maybe approaching 4, but I think around 3. And so it's just always kind of been the two of us. And I think that, part of that is just being able to see like this incredibly strong woman who's extremely independent. And I think when I think about my work ethic and just getting stuff done, it comes from having that example because there was like no days off. We didn't have this like family unit to leverage. So it was just her. And so the idea that like if stuff needs to get done, it needs to get done. I think I just learned that not even intentionally, but just observing her and how she moved and how she made stuff work. I think that growing up in Tampa was interesting because it's very different from Tampa today. Like when people are like, oh, I just vacationed in Tampa. I'm like, what? Why? But now that I've gone back, I see it because it's completely transformed in so many ways. But when I grew up there, we definitely lived in the inner city, like all Black neighborhood down the street from the projects. And so it shaped me because I grew up in an all Black neighborhood, but my mom also put me in special assignment in different schools, trying to give me as much access as possible. So I was in primarily all white classes, especially when I went into the gifted program. And I think that is where I started to see that dual, your foot's in one side and the other. It's like, oh, I'm not Black enough for the Black kids, but I'm also Black. And so I'm not white enough for the white kids. Like, so there's this tension that I think I started to experience, not in my first years in elementary, because I still had some diversity in my classes, but it was when my mom switched my elementary school. And I was, I think, one of 3 Black people in the entire school. Like it was a music teacher, me, and this other student. And so that was a shock. I mean, I knew how to navigate folks who didn't look like me, but my race was very obvious. And I think I was reminded that I wasn't from there. I wasn't from that subdivision. I'll say the other thing that what shaped me is in terms of learning to shrink. And now, because I've done work with my therapist, but I think we're tracing it back to where that shrinking started is from that time in that elementary school, because I'll never forget when you asked me when I was a kid what I wanted to be. It was Oprah. And it's like, I'm going to be the next Oprah. I'm going to have like my own talk show. And people would just be like, oh, you can't do that. Like, Oprah's kind of like a once in a million time thing. Like, it'll never be another opportunity for a Black woman to be on TV, whatever. And so, but the thing is, we had a morning show at that school because it was a very well-funded school. And so I went from going to computer lab like once a week or something to having just a ton of computers in every single, classroom. And so I was on the morning show and you were supposed to rotate off of the morning show, but they always kept me on as a co-anchor because I was doing such a great job. And then one day I came in, I'd been on there probably like for the whole 9-week period. I came in and I had just been like snatched off and put back on equipment. And I was asking, like, did I do something wrong? Like, what happened? And they're like, oh, we just have to give other people a chance. And I was like, okay. But my mom inquired, and it turned out that some of the parents, when they found out that I didn't live there, because they were always hearing my name from their kids, like, oh, Morenike's on the morning show and da-da-da. But when they found out I didn't live there, they complained that, this kid who's not in the subdivision is getting to shine on the morning show. And so I was taken off. And so longer story short, I think what that imprinted on me is if I take up too much space, or if I use my voice, or if I have impact, then there can be consequences. And again, that was probably to some subconscious level, but that's when I started, I think, shrinking. And being that, people like to joke like Florida's not the South. It very much is. I think that it may not have some of the obvious country, rural aspects, even though it does. But like when you think of Miami or Orlando or whatever, but the mentality and some of the prejudices and things that you equate with the South is very present in Florida. And so, that happened. So it was, again, every school I was in, it's you're not Black enough to be with the Black kids. You're trying to fit in with the white kids. Like, where do you actually belong? And so my hustle was books. I was like, I just want to go to the best college I can and get out of Florida. That was my goal. It was like, I know I'm not going to stay here because I don't feel like this is the right place for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and books are freedom, right? Books are right. Not if you're not living or in the place that you want to be. Books give you someplace else to travel to, and something my mother always would say, like, I get to go anywhere I want if I have a book, right?
Yeah.
And books also give you access and opportunity to go someplace. They're like passports, right? So like, So that's interesting. Obviously, I knew that you were from Florida. I have Florida family, so we've discussed Florida before. I very much, as a New Yorker, think it is the South. And so I hear that 100%. Tell me how that experience of learning to navigate in spaces where you may not necessarily have been wanting, and also understanding that sometimes you got to shrink to grow, led you to your career path.
When I think about practicing the law and like moving into that space, which at least as a child, and I think it's also accurate, it's a predominantly kind of white space, especially at the big law firms. And so I felt like I know how to maneuver because I've been doing it my entire life. And so it felt somewhat like a natural transition. Like I knew it would be tough, but I also felt like it was just a natural kind of extension. It's like you go from high school to college. So it's like I've been navigating people who don't look like me my entire life. So now I'm just going to keep doing that in this next arena. So I don't think I had angst about it from that perspective. I think in terms of becoming a lawyer, that was really growing up watching the Cosby Show. And, I know everything that's happened with Cosby is separate aside, that a lot of us grew up in the 80s and 90s watching the Cosby Show, and especially growing up in an area where people weren't going to college. Like that was the example that I had. He was a doctor, she was a lawyer. I took biology. I was like, this class sucks. So I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer, and people had always told me that I should be a lawyer and that I would, because I was good at arguing both sides of things and so forth. So I think for me, when I thought about law, I just wanted to move to New York. I had family in Jersey at the time, so I'd been to the city, but to me, it was like, I want to do contracts. I associated contracts with Wall Street, and Wall Street was in New York. So I always had a very kind of logical, linear approach to things. It was like, this makes sense. So I'm going to move to New York and be a lawyer. So that was my path starting in probably, I think, 10th grade. And it didn't really change until obviously now I'm full time with my coaching and consulting business. And so left Florida, went to UNC Chapel Hill for undergrad. And it was because I wanted to go out of state because I thought if I didn't go away for college, I would never leave. But I also didn't want to go so far that like I didn't apply to like the Ivies and stuff because they were just too far for me. It's like I'd never been away from home. And so UNC to me was like, it's the 10-hour drive. So it's just far enough that like I can't just run home if things get hard, but I also can get home in a day if I need to. And that was kind of my journey in navigating that space. And that was the first time where I felt like I dealt with a lot of, I don't know, I guess colorism. A lot of the girls on campus, it was like if you weren't a certain hue, the guys just ignored you. Like, and I hadn't experienced that coming from Florida, because that's just not how it was. So again, there's just these things where you start to feel like maybe I don't fit. But again, I was focused on academics. So just fast forwarding, coming to NYU, I thought NYU Law School was very welcoming environment. I had an amazing experience there. And my goal coming in was like, I want to go to the best firm and get great training. So I started at Cravath in New York as a corporate transactional attorney. And that was just kind of my intro to the legal profession, being there and then going to Allen & Overy in London before transitioning in-house. And then obviously now full-time with my business. But I think the prep work for navigating those spaces started all the way back in elementary because of, unfortunately, but with the climate of being in a space where people remind you of your race or other you and having to learn to navigate people's feelings. Like, and I'll never forget one time this girl, we were supposed to sit next to each other on the bus, and I kept asking her, where do you want to sit? And she was like, I don't know. And they were yelling at us to sit down. So I just sat down. And then she started crying and ran off the bus. And then now I was getting in trouble because I didn't sit. I was like, what is this world where I'm getting in trouble because I'm not sitting, like I'm following the directions, but now I'm in trouble for following the directions. So again, they seem like small things, but when you are constantly being given this stimuli that's telling you like there's a way that you need to act and show up, I got a lot of that training. And also some of those scars, so to your point about shrinking, I think there is something about what you said, shrinking to grow. I think I was more shrinking to survive and feeling that I needed to be small in order to achieve what I wanted and not understanding how to take up space. I didn't think I could be me and take up space and reach the levels professionally that I wanted. And that's something that I had to unlearn over time.
And I think that that's probably, kind of bringing us to today and what, we have a lot of things in common, but what I think a lot of people equate about thinking about both of us is I started off my career as a coach. You are the person who anybody who says they want to coach, I'm like, you need to call Morenike, right? And what I think that it makes you really good at what you do is that you are not coming from a place of like holier than thou. You're coming from a place of, I've been there, experienced this, had some of these challenges, and here's how I navigated them. And here are the tools that I picked up along the way that can help you to move to this next thing. And a lot of the conversation that you and I have, and we have a lot of them, are about what we see people maybe not showing up in the ways that we would love them to show up. I'm being kind when I say that. Right?
Absolutely.
And so, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is to bring folks into this dialogue with us, right? And talking about the importance of having emotional intelligence and how it can make or break your brand when you don't have it, right? So it's that EQ and that's the IQ, and how one does not stand by. Like you can have as much IQ as you want to, but if you don't have EQ, it's problematic. And so I thought let's kind of jump into that conversation and some of the things that we have seen. And I thought I would prompt you with a reminder of some conversation that we have had. One that I thought about this in anticipation of this is we were thinking of a collaboration that we were involved in and understanding that sometimes your skill set is not enough. It is how you do the things that you do. And so what are the things that you experience when you're talking to your clients or just, just in general? What comes to mind when you're thinking of folks who people are like, they've got it, but that it is not enough to make the experience with them translate. And I'm being cagey on purpose, but let's just jump into that. What are your reflections on people who don't have EQ? How about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a bear trap that you're waiting to step into, because at the end of the day, like, especially in the legal profession, but corporate America generally, like you are in the business of people. Like, I don't care what it is in terms of the product or service that is what drives the bottom line, but like you have to deal with people. You have to deal with people internally, your clients, it's relationship management, and EQ is a part of that. Like emotional intelligence is a part of that. Because the way that I define emotional intelligence is quite simply, actions plus awareness. It really just breaks down to that. And so it's having a level of self and situational awareness. And then how do you now act based on that awareness? So it's at its base, like that's really what it is. And so where I think that people fall down is they stop at what I'll say it's step one, but I don't even know. It might just be floor, like level zero, but it's like, oh, I have self-awareness.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Like, yay. But what else? So someone's like, oh, I'm aware I talk a lot.
Mhm.
Okay. But then you're not pairing that with the action of, okay, I'm aware that I tend to talk a lot. Let me think of the impact that has on other people. Let me now think of what actions I can take in terms of, okay, I want to make sure I invite someone else to contribute their thoughts, perhaps before I say my answer, or if I recognize that, I haven't heard anyone else speak in a while. Let me pause and ask, does anyone have any insights before I move to my next point? So now you're starting to actually manage the behavior you become aware of.
Mhm.
A lot of people don't manage the behavior. And by not managing it, you're making it everybody else's problem. Because
Mm.
what you're saying is, I'm aware I do this thing and you all just need to suck it up.
They'll
You all
do
need
it.
to kind of pivot. Yeah, you need to adjust and just make space for it. And it's a very selfish approach. I'll be honest. It's the only way I can label it. It's a selfish approach. And so I think that a lot of times people stop at oh, I've become aware of this thing that I do, but they fail to start any type of management. And that is short-sighted. And so I think really strong EQ is not just becoming aware, but it's starting to manage it, both what you do, but then also having awareness of your environment, other people's feelings, and then how do you kind of manage or influence based on what you now know? Because management is work. It takes work to manage yourself, is why most people don't do it. Like,
Management is work, because if you just stop at the I know part, like to your point, that's not even half the battle. It's right. It's like now you understand the tools that you have, but you ain't using them, right? Like that you can build the house, but the hammer's over there and the stuff is over there. You're in the middle, and the process is not going to come together on its own. You have to do the work, and that doing the work piece, when I was coaching more frequently, that would be the challenge. I would say, like, as a coach, I'm like the foot in somebody's back. Like, you gotta do the thing, but you're not doing the thing. So how do we move from your knowledge to doing? And that's why I think having a coach is so impactful. We've talked about this. I have a coach. I don't know what I would do without my coach. And it's in order for me, because I'm not okay with being stuck or stagnant. I want to continue to move. And I have found that folks who have less EQ are okay with right where they are. And to your point, and the people having to deal with it, and having been one of the people who had to deal with it, I'll be even more open in that. I have self-awareness about some things and some of the ways that I show up in some places. And I found trying to get some feedback saying, like, hey, what are some things I could do differently? Asking some of my stakeholders and getting their feedback, and then trying to take action, and then understanding my brand was so strong that when I didn't show up the way that people expected, they thought something was wrong. But they're like, well, Paula, you're not bossing us around. I don't understand what's going on. I'm like, I was told by all of you that I should not boss you around. So what? So it's a nuanced thing too. And I think you need to understand, because I also am a big believer that people need to be led. Leaders are important for a reason, but it doesn't have to be always, like a ruling fist. It can be leading through being strategic and having understanding of how to move the parts, chess, not checkers, etc. So I wonder, what advice would you give to someone who maybe is having some challenges with going from the knowledge to the action piece? How would you tell them to reflect or act differently?
So part of what you said is in terms of like, it's external support. So I'm a big advocate, obviously, of getting a coach, therapist, internal, like your close inner circle. So it's like you have to, first and foremost, have a trusted advisory board, like a circle encompassing you, who can reflect back some of the blind spots. So the first step is to get the awareness, but also don't stop at your own awareness. Because I think what people think is like, I know I do this thing, but how do you know? Is it something that you notice? Is it something that someone else told you? Like, you need to have that holistic piece. So make sure you've tapped enough external resources to reflect back. Like I always say, you can't see yourself. And so you need other people to be mirrors for you. Just make sure you don't pick a funhouse mirror, because I think sometimes.
Oh, that's good. Right. Right.
Yes. Because, some people are living in a state of delusion and you are surrounding yourself with people who are just doubling down and letting you be Delulu. You have to get some folks who, when you walk into that mirror, it's like when you get on the scale, you're like, oh my, I had a good holiday, didn't I? Like there may be a little shock factor, but if you don't, so that's just the starting point, because even when people tell me they have awareness, my first thing is still to dig based on what? Like, where are you getting this data? Are you only asking people who are your BFFs? Like, are you asking someone who knows you, but you're not as close because they may have a different perspective? Have you asked people who observe you more in a professional context? Like, you need to get a good 360 view of yourself, because that also, from a branding perspective, if you are not showing up consistently across the board, that can highlight gaps. To be clear, I'm not saying like you are acting the same way in church that you are in the club, because we all turn up, and down aspects of our personality, but that doesn't mean that you're being inauthentic. You just recognize there's a time and the place for certain things. But like, so I'm transparent. I think that's something like I'm relatable. That's not something that I stop being in any of the settings I'm in. How much transparency, how much vulnerability obviously may depend on the depth of our relationship or the context, but you're always going to get that aspect. So that's the first benchmark, is making sure that you actually have the level of awareness, figuring out then like, who do you want to be? Like, who do you want to actually be? Like, what do you want your brand to be? But who are you evolving into? Like, what does your aspirational version of yourself look like? And again, this isn't about, coming up with something that's, I want to play for the NBA and I'm, 5'1". I mean, that may, Muxie Bugs would think, like, it may not be your portion.
Right.
But it is to say that, like, I aspire to be someone who is healthy, and that looks like me working out 3 to 5 times a whatever it is. But like, do you have a clear image of what your ideal self looks like? Because that then is like, okay, the awareness is like your GPS. We've taken like what our starting position is. Now you need a clear picture of where it is you would like to grow to. So then you can identify the gaps. And that's when then you start to put the different strategies in place. So for instance, like I said, with the awareness, if you're made aware that you speak a lot, like you talk too much, then I was like, simple ways in the meeting, like, okay, these are some strategies I'm going to do. I'm going to let someone else answer the question first. I'm going to invite comments before I share. Before I move to my next point, I'm going to ask, does anyone have any thoughts? So you then put in little steps and things that you can do easily that check the behavior. You also then need to have accountability in terms of asking others, like, back to the trusted advisory board. If there's something that I'm working on, someone else needs to know I'm working on it so that they can give me feedback, so that they know to look for this thing. It's like, hey, I'm working on speaking slower. So when we're in meetings, give me feedback. If you hear me going really, really fast, like send me a message so I can like start to pull it back and get my pace back in order. It's things like that. I also tell people, start to be more present in your body in terms of like what is happening physically when you are doing these behaviors that you have decided maybe you want to do less of. So for instance, if we just go with someone who is speaking a lot or speaking very quickly, those people tend to get out of breath because they just aren't taking in air. So being aware that like when you are starting to lose your breath, could it be that you're speaking too fast?
Right.
You're not giving yourself the time to take in oxygen. I was working with one client. I said, like, make a little metronome on your thigh with your finger and just tap it at like a steady pace, and then start to like slow your speaking down to now match the pace. Nobody can see that I'm tapping my thigh under the desk, but I've just naturally been able to regulate. So I think part of it, just to sum it up, is like, one, get the good awareness. to get the circle to make sure that they can reflect back and validate the awareness and also highlight kind of any blind spots that you have. Then you want to like kind of 3, get clear on like who it is that you'd like that brand to be, evolve into, identify the gaps, and then start to put those little strategic things in place, little action steps that you can do that over time shift the behavior. This isn't like you decide tomorrow, because to your point, when you have an established brand, it takes time and consistency for people to buy into a new brand. And like just how you establish the one reputation, when you look to rebrand. So like, for instance, with me and my business, people knew me as being a practicing attorney. And so even as I started building my business, I was doing both. So like, oh, she's an attorney, but she also does coaching. And then when I went full time, heavy rebranding, heavy business development, coaching, consulting, like really making sure that that's what people associated with me. But that was consistency over time. And now that's what people think of. And so they remember that I practice law, but their first thought is for me for coaching or speaking. And so I think people fall down on the consistency piece. They want to do an action one time and people instantly be like, yes, this is your whole new brand, and it doesn't work. And then I think people get discouraged because they don't feel like they're getting the affirmation that they desire, when in fact, you just haven't been doing the behavior long enough for it to take root. You plant the seed, you got to water it, you got to give it a little fertilizer, give it time to germinate, and move from there.
Look at you. Let's see, the biology just came right back.
I like biology, like conceptually, but that class was painful. Like, and I love my biology. Like, I actually took years of biology just because I loved the teacher in high school, but it just fundamentally, I wanted to be in chemistry. I just couldn't get the time slot with the chemistry teacher I wanted to match up.
Well, I honor that, because all of the ones that had sciencey backgrounds, I was like, you know what, I probably shouldn't be doing this. Know thyself. That was my first part of my self-awareness, where I was like, this is not my portion, to your point. I was just thinking about when you were talking about the steps, that a place where the steps can kind of trip up is getting an acknowledgement of where you're messing up, or where you can do better, I should say, is feedback, right? And sometimes feedback comes from trusted advisors, from people who are stakeholders. And sometimes it comes from people who are not, and who are in a place where they're just giving you feedback so that we can move the truck along, or whatever the thing is. And it can be really challenging to get feedback when you haven't asked for it, one, and two, when it is not great feedback. And as you were talking, it reminded me of some conversations that we've had about receiving feedback and how that can be a way in which your brand can shape for amongst others, because everybody needs it, right? None of us are perfect, and all of us can do better. And all of us, I think, should want to grow and do better, right? So let's talk a little bit about receiving feedback and how that can be, that can impact how you are seen in all of your spaces. What comes to mind?
Yeah. Feedback, I think it's critical. I mean, first of all, that's the quickest way to validate what your brand is obviously asking other people. But feedback is, to me, like when people are looking to accelerate their growth from a leadership development perspective, from a professional development perspective, is using feedback. Like, where are your perceived gaps? Where are your perceived strengths? Like, feedback doesn't always have to be negative. Like, I think people think of feedback, and because most of the time, a lot of us can think about that one time where we got feedback and it was really painful and it cut us down to the white meat. And like, I was like, I just felt like that was just really harsh. And it felt like it came out of nowhere. And we can get really bogged down in the timing, the delivery, and then we miss the value of it. So as it relates to feedback, and in receiving it well, in particular, some of the things I like to tell clients is, first of all, you have to, again, going back to the awareness piece, recognize, like, how do you tend to show up when you're triggered? Like when someone says something to you that you don't like, that offends you, that is catching you off guard. what is your natural inclination? You need to have clarity around like your nonverbals, not just your verbals, what you do. Do you eye roll? Are you giving them the little neck swing? Like, are you disengaged and sitting back in the chair? Like, and again, so this, you need that visual, because sometimes when people are giving us feedback and we think we received it well, we didn't from their perspective, because they're taking in the whole visual. And I'm like, I'm trying to help this person be great and not step in this mousetrap. And they're just giving me all types of this. I was like, I don't have time for this, because the reality is that life is life, and for everyone, people are navigating a bunch of things behind the scenes that we have no insights to. And so when someone is taking the time to give you feedback, whether you like them or not, there is potentially a gift in there. Now, I will say there's a caveat. This is not about the haters and someone who's always looking for something negative to say about you. Right. This is for people, whether they're close to you or not, who are just reflecting back an observation for your growth. And so the first thing around feedback, I believe, is understanding that feedback is data. That is it. And so going back to when we talked about identity, I feel like it's so important for you to be clear on who you are so that you're clear on who you are not. So I know that I believe I am a kind, thoughtful person. If someone is giving me like a feedback saying that I am mean and I'm like, I am just insensitive and I don't seem to care about, well, now I know fundamentally that's not who I am. But because I have that clarity, instead of going back and forth with them about like, that's not who I am and da-da-da, because people start to defend. I want to understand, like, what about my interactions with you left you with that impression? So now I can go on a little bit more of a fact-finding mission. But I think a lot of times when people receive feedback, it's difficult for them to receive it well, especially if it's harsh or it feels harsh, because they're fighting against what they're taking is like, you're saying this is who I am. You're saying this is who I am not. Like, and I'm fighting against that because I know that's who I am.
It gets real.
And it's like, you have to take the step away. It's like, I'm this person and you're saying and reflecting back, but this is the impression. So let's figure out where the gaps are. Why? And I think that's again with the emotional intelligence, because being able to take a step back from like their delivery was trash with this feedback. And, my good old Florida side of me wants to come up and say some things, but what they said may be true, or at least true from their perspective. And I want to do that because that's how you start to, again, whether it's like building a new brand, rehabbing a tarnished brand, or just understanding how people move. Right. Like they're telling you how they receive information, right, wrong, or indifferent. They're giving you a glimpse into how they process. And that can also be insightful in terms of how you then relationship manage, interact, or even avoid that person. But like, it's data. And I have another thought on it, but before I do that, I'll see if you had anything.
No, please go ahead with the other thought.
Okay. Because the other thing I would say, like, because one thing that, you hit on around who gives us the feedback can also be a challenge, right? Because first of all, I didn't ask you your opinion, and now you just rolled up on me and gave it to me, and I don't like you anyways. So it's just like, let's be honest. Let's just call a spade, and that makes it difficult. And so what I was coaching one client on is like, I coach him like, you have to sift through the feedback, and what I like to do is apply some filters. Like when you hear it, putting the person aside, is this something that is, that's probably true. That's definitely true. It could be true, or is it like, no, this feels very unlikely that this is true, or it's wildly off base. And if you can put the person aside and really focus on what was said, and especially when you get to that, I think it's unlikely or off base, that's when you want to go to your accountability corner and vet that. Hey, I received this feedback and it feels very off base to me, but like, have you ever seen me do this behavior, or have you experienced? And they might be like, yeah, you do that all the time. Right. They just haven't flagged it to you because part of their grace in being your friend is that it doesn't bug them the same way. Right. I think that sometimes with feedback, it's something that may be a first impression. We haven't heard it before. And so we're like, oh, this person doesn't know me. No, some other people just love you and they're tolerating the behavior because it's just not agitating them the same way. And a lot of people will love us into stagnation because they're not
Say a
willing to
word. You
tell us
better
what we
say
need to
a
grow.
word right there. Love us into stagnation. You know, it's funny that you bring in love and feedback, because I always say, if you are truly going to give good feedback, you should give it out of love. And people, you know, in corporate are like, what? I don't love that person. I'm just trying to get them to do the work. And I go, no, if it's love for yourself, if it's love for the money, if it's love for the, like, but give it with a want for that person to be getting better from it, as opposed to I'm giving it because I'm annoyed. I'm giving it because they annoy me. I'll give it whatever the thing is. And so that love can be self-love that you're giving it to them so that you're preventing it from happening again. But when you just give it willy-nilly and with no strategy and thought about how it's going to be received, I think we cause so much more harm than we do good, right? And so, you know, my listeners will know that I've said over and over again that one of my big beliefs is that sometimes you get feedback that is full on trash and you can just dash it away. You can just be like, that's great, bye. For example, someone gave me feedback that I was too familiar with folks, and I was like, that literally is my brand. Like I'm
Exactly.
that is literally how I built my brand. And so I'm okay with that being the feedback. Whether it doesn't fit for you, that's okay. I don't have to be for you. I'm for them. But that self-awareness, and also me knowing my goals and my vision for myself, made me be able to sift through and literally just like give it like the one that alley-oop to that feedback and toss it in the garbage. But I do think that particularly when you're newer in a space or you're trying to make a shift, you know, brand shifts are something I talk to my clients about all the time. Like, here's how you do it. It can be hard when you get feedback that, oh, it's not working. But sometimes it's just not working with that person as opposed to generally. So, you know, it's really important to have an understanding of who you are and how you're showing up and to know yourself. But, you know, I used to joke when I did sessions and say, like, if I was going to write a book, it'd be called Be More Self-Aware, but nobody would buy it. like you have
to name it like this. Why nobody likes you?
Right, exactly that. And so I love that we're having this conversation, and I'm sure for some of my listeners, it's going to not be easy to hear some of the things that we're saying, right? Because one of the things that I learned as a coach is that even though I was a paid messenger, it didn't make the receiving the message easier for some folks. And in fact, some people would be like, well, actually, and I'm like, no. You are literally paying me to be one of your trusted advisors. I'm going to tell you this thing so that we can figure this out. And, you know, one of the things I wanted to get to in our conversation before we close is just about, and I think we're getting to it. It's about communication. It's like effective communication. And we started our conversation. I was like, I know we're going to have to do this multiple times. So if we don't jump all into this, that's fine, because we can talk again. And of course, you have an open invitation to talk about whatever you want. You're to come back. But what are some of the ways that folks communicate? Actually, I want to retract that question. I want to ask another question.
Okay.
This is the question I want to get to. How does being passive aggressive in your communication detrimentally impact your brand and the way you might be able to navigate in whatever space that you're in?
Oh, that good old passive aggressive. I think for a couple of things, like first, you know, people more often than not are aware that you're being passive aggressive. And so it impacts your perceived authenticity. You know, it impacts your ability to develop trust with folks, because it's like, oh, you're someone who talks out of both sides of your mouth. Like, you're saying one thing, but it's clear, you know, you're undermining me at the same time. And so my experience of you is not pleasant. Like, people will not necessarily enjoy being around you as much just because you bring up something in them when you're doing your little digs and things like that. But again, like the trust piece, the inauthenticity piece, the not feeling like you are part of the team. So it's like, I feel like I have to watch my back and my front from you, as opposed to, so back to your point of delivering feedback and reflecting back opportunities to me, it's like you're saying stuff in a way that it's nice, nasty. It's this like undercurrent of this whole other thing. And now you're creating mental and emotional work for me because it's like I have to do my job and I already have to, you have to manage and relationship manage. But now I have to like be playing like a chess over here. I'm playing 3D chess with you, go fish over here. Like it's just, you're adding work. And so it becomes this thing of, but I think the trust piece is the biggest thing. Is like people who I view as passive aggressive, I don't really trust their motives, their opinions, where they're coming from. And so the other issue is when they actually are trying to be helpful or they do have a nugget that would be valuable, it's discounted. It's like the boy who cried wolf. It's like when there actually was a wolf, nobody really believed him because of all of his foolishness. And so it's the knock-on effect of the seeds that you're sowing. It's like, making people feel, I won't say like you're making, but like people tend to feel like, there can be insecurities like around you. Like, and so again, it's just to me, passive aggressiveness is not, it's not the desired approach, I think, from a leader. I think it's easy for people to do it because they're trying to like appear nice or they don't want to say the hard thing. But as you said, like part of being a leader, and this is why everybody isn't called to be a leader, is being willing to say the hard thing. And sometimes that means that everyone may not like you, but they will hopefully respect you in terms of your willingness to, push them and lead them forward. Someone who is passive aggressive, again, it just is very triggering, especially for certain personality types. And that's a whole other conversation. But, I have a personality type where I appreciate people being more direct. Even if it hurts my feelings at times, I still would appreciate the directness because I know that I believe that there is caring. And like you said, there's love there because you love me enough to tell me the truth. I don't trust people who I view as passive aggressive because I feel like I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And creating that type of unsteady ground for people, it really is going to circle back and bite you in the butt. And I know some people will be like, oh, well, I have this manager and they just got promoted. And again, it's not to say that they will never have success, but I always say that you are creating a ceiling for yourself because just because you have this promotion, what could you have had if you actually had a strong wind behind you of people that you have built up who would really push and accelerate you even further? So this may be where you tap out. So that's cute. That's great. You got this role, but you could have had this one if you had built that pipeline and legacy of people who would support you as opposed to people who are shielding themselves from you.
So what triggered the question for me, and you literally was like, I don't know, whatever sports analogy, I threw it to you and then you caught it or whatever. Because what triggered the question for me was one of your Mondays with Morenike when you talked about we need to stop asking people to be nice. And I was like, so I tell my listeners know that I have a daughter, she's in college, and I say to her all the time, I don't want you to be nice. I want you to be kind. Right?
Absolutely.
And kindness says, I'm going to give you direct feedback. Kindness says, I'm going to modulate my communication to impact you in the way that is best for you in our relationship. And passive aggression for me, I'm one of those people you talked about who I guess I'm wildly triggered by passive aggression. It frustrates me. I'm a very, I always say I'm aggressive. I'm not passive aggressive. I want you to tell me what it is, and I want to tell you what it is. But that doesn't mean I do it meanly. But I do it kindly with the thought of our relationship wanting to stay intact. And I'm glad that we got there without me even having to say this is what we're going to do because and this is going to happen. Two things. First off, I think I came up with in the middle of this conversation something that we need to do going forward. And I think it is like ask Morenike and Paula on Branding Room Only. Like, so all of you, one of your to-dos from this conversation with two coaches is that you're going to start sending in questions of how I want to hear, like at work, Sheila, because it's always Sheila, did XYZ thing. How should I manage it? We're going to answer those questions. And I can't wait to see that some of the times it's going to be we are total aligned, and other times we're going to be like, I'm going to say fight them. And Morenike is going to tell you exactly what to do properly.
100%.
One, so there's that. I'm looking forward to us making that happen.
Yes.
Two is I want to get into my final questions that I ask all of my guests. And one, I think I might be able to answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway, which is this. Branding is so important to me. It's something that I think about all the time. And for the people who have the strongest brands, there's an ethos underneath it, right? It runs through everything that they do, and it's continual and it's consistent. And I call it the stand by your brand. So what is one aspect of your personal brand that you will never, ever compromise on?
Yeah, I would say transparency and relatability, I guess, are both there for me. That I can't compromise on those. I think that partly that is my brand. I think that's what, for those who I'm for, are drawn to the fact that I don't shy away from sharing when I've done it right, when I've done it wrong. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm posting this and I wasn't going to, because I have all these boxes behind me, but you're going to get these boxes. And so I think just being relatable and desiring to genuinely connect with people and knowing and recognizing that things that I've been through can be helpful. And so being transparent, because it's easy to share just the wins, but being willing to share some of the lessons that came from those bear traps I stepped in and those tripwires, I think is a part of my brand that will always be a part of my brand. And if it ever ceases to be part of my brand, I hope that those around me in my advisory circle, yourself included, would be like, girl, what happened? You done went off the rails, and would call me on it. So I give everyone permission to call me if you see that my brand has shifted and lost those aspects.
I love that. And it reminds me of the feedback that I got from the Petty Branding series when I shared my own transparency about how I showed up. People are still messaging me about that. Okay, the other question I ask all of my guests is this. Branding Room Only is a play on Standing Room Only because I am clever. And so what is the aspect experience of you, of Morenike, that folks will be in a room with only standing room to experience about or with you?
I think it is my unique ability to blend wisdom with actionable steps. I think that my purpose isn't to just speak and motivate people, but it's really to be a catalyst for change through speaking. And so I endeavor that you will be inspired, that you will be motivated when you hear something, but that I will also have imparted tools and practical steps about how you can now implement or start implementing or start seeing that change. Like I don't, so I think that's what I think my unique sauce is that will bring people into that standing room only, is like, I want to be in a room with her because she's going to not just hit us with things that inspire us. You know, she's not going to just give us wisdom that sounds lovely. She's also going to give us practical ways that we can implement that today and that we can start transforming and changing our lives to move in the direction that we want to see. Because I think that it's great to be inspired, but I also have gone to stuff. I get home, I'm like, I don't know what to do with this though. Like, I don't know where to start. And so my desire to help people know where to start is, I think, my unique sauce.
I love that. So speaking of that, for the people who want to stay in touch with you, to understand how you continue to add value and catalyze the people, what should they do? How should they find you?
Yeah, so definitely LinkedIn, Morenike Williams on LinkedIn. Mondays with Morenike every Monday, except when I'm like maybe on vacation. But even then, I'm going to not have those be gaps. But I'd say every Monday dropping a video. We're just giving some nuggets, some insights, things for you to reflect on. I'm going to be launching a newsletter in Q4. So if you're interested in getting updates through email, then go to my website, revisioncoaching.com, and submit your name and email, and I will pull you into that listserv. And Instagram, the Morenike Williams, is where you can find me. So I'd say those are the main places to find me, and, reach out on LinkedIn, DM me, get in the comments. And we'll be doing workshops next year. So if you're interested in some of those topics, again, getting on the newsletter is the best way to stay up to date on what's coming up.
Fantastic. Well, I know that I am inspired and know that everybody else is going to be too. Y'all, I want you to send this to that person who needs to hear whatever the topic was that we discussed, whether it was EQ, getting feedback, communicating properly, not being passive aggressive. I know somebody needs to hear one of those or all of those things. Definitely send it. And as Morenike mentioned, we'll have everything on the page for the podcast. And also Morenike is listed on my Coaches of Color resource. So we'll share that as well. And she'll be back because we're definitely going to be doing Ask Us. And we're going to tell you what we think you should do. Morenike, thank you for joining me in the branding room. Can't wait to have you back again. Bye.
All right. Thanks for having me.